All right, so last week we talked about laughter and the importance that it has in our lives. On a completely different note, this week we're going to be talking about grief.
Oh, good grief.
It's most often, of course, an unhappy and painful emotion. It can be described as mourning or grieving or bereavement. You may have heard all of these terms in discussing the grief process. The 5 general stages that have been identified are denial or disbelief and numbness. The second is anger or blaming others. The third is bargaining or depressed mood, sadness and crying. Acceptance is the 5th, and coming to terms, and that's the final stage of grief. I know that for me, it was a little prolonged. The anger and blaming others was a prolonged stage for me. The depressed mood and sadness was a prolonged stage for me. But the denial and disbelief, not so much. Bargaining, not so much. And then acceptance was what came at the end of that period. So it doesn't necessarily happen in any order, like we said, but, it can. These stages were never meant to stuff these messy emotions into neat little boxes. They are just responses to loss that many people have, but there's no normal response to loss. There's no typical loss out there. Our grief is as individual as our souls. If our grief is as individual as our specific talents, intelligence, and life experience, then these categories must be questioned and explored and maybe even expanded. But they give us a frame to have a conversation about working through grief. While the experience of grief is a very individual process, depending on many factors, there are certain commonalities that people who grieve experience. Those things are nightmares, dryness of mouth, appetite problems, shortness of breath, repetitive motions to avoid pain, and sleep disorders. They're often reported by many people experiencing normal grief. Even hallucinatory experiences can be normal early on in grief. If you're trying to let go of someone who has passed away, then it's even a very normal occurrence to have hallucinations of that person. People who are grieving may have crying spells, a lack of productivity at work.
Oh, good grief.
And I am very, very pleased to have on the phone with me right now Jenny Newberry.
I walked in and I tickled his foot. And his foot was really cold that morning. And I said, "Oh, baby, you're so cold." And I covered him up. Mm-hmm. And I walked around and, and I was tickling Jacob. He had to go to school that day. And, get up, get up. And I laid down beside him. And I remember looking at Ron's chest thinking, gosh, he must be really in a deep sleep. He's hardly breathing. Mm-hmm. Well, then I panicked and I jumped up and I went over and I said, "Wake up now, I'm not playing with you anymore." And of course he didn't. Mm. And I remember putting my fingers on his neck to feel his pulse. And all I could feel was my own pulse in my fingers. Mm-hmm. So I'm shaking him and I'm saying, "Ron, I'm going to call 911. You're going to be so embarrassed. You better get up. Quit playing with me." And I put my finger on his eyelid. Because before, I was rude about things. I was mean sometimes and just picking at him. I would pull his eyelid open. And I put my finger there to do it. Mm-hmm. And for some reason I didn't. I snatched my hand away. Because in my heart I knew that the eyes that I love to look at me would not look back at me. Mm-hmm. I was out of work for about 2 weeks. I came back, and everybody was real supportive. I think they had instructions not to look at me if I was upset or anyway.
Don't make eye contact with her.
Yeah, exactly. She may break.
Right.
But anyway, so I'm standing up. I teach kindergarten, and we were doing the calendar, and I said, "Well, okay, today's Tuesday. Tomorrow's going to be Wednesday." And I don't even remember if these were the right days or not, but tomorrow's Wednesday. The next day's Thursday. And it just, all of a sudden, it kind of hit me. The world's going on. There are going to be days after this one and after this one. Mm-hmm. And I remember just crumbling. And the lady that works with me, she saw me. She saw my face. Mm-hmm. She jumped right up, took over. And I came to the bathroom. And I went into the restroom. And I had Kleenex in one hand and toilet tissue. And I truly just looked. I didn't know what to do. Mm-hmm. I needed to wipe my face. And I looked in the mirror at myself and I thought, who is that? I am not a weepy, sappy person, but I truly am broken. Mm-hmm. And it kind of was that day that I thought, and that was the day I had been afraid of. Mm-hmm. That was the day it broke me. It was a Thursday. I can tell you now it was a Thursday. Mm. It broke me.